Okay, we don't need that sound anymore. Let's hear some different sound. Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here for the Music Masterclass, and thanks people for checking in the chat. I will be monitoring that on my phone as possible, and please let me know as usual, since I keep experimenting with setups. Let me know if you can see and hear everything okay, and if all is working well. It seems like it probably is, but you know, it's always good for me to hear confirmation of. So this is the Music Masterclass. If you're if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. So in this session, I've got like a bunch of pieces queued up that people have submitted over the last week or two, and I want to kind of recap what we've been doing, what I've been focusing on, so we can kind of set our minds around what's going on. As most of you know, I did a workshop, and many of you were at it a few weeks ago, like right at the beginning of the month. A workshop on how to create a great chord progression. And I talked about some techniques for creating chord progressions, and kind of set people loose and said, hey, why don't you all try to create some great chord progressions? And if you're looking for something to, some inspiration for that, maybe take a folk song or some other familiar song from your neck of the woods, from your cultural experience, and try to come up with a new chord progression for it. So that's kind of the overall theme of things, and people have been doing all sorts of different things, and I'm going to kind of jump around and just try to I don't know, give some feedback on some of the music that I've been hearing here. So I'm gonna I'm gonna skip around a little bit and talk about some pieces. So some of them, like this one here, I haven't really checked out yet, and Damien Dyer. So this is a piece that I downloaded, and I want to find out, Damien, are you here? So one thing I want to start doing in the future is be organized to the point where when people's music's going to be up, I know that they're here, and I can bring them on board. So yeah, now that we have the ability to bring people on board, it's increasingly useful if I can have that sort of schedule. So I'll be brainstorming about that, and I will take your comments about this. So basically stalling, giving Damien a moment to see if he wants to check in. But I do want to look at the score here. And he says it's a unique bioverse landscape in the west of Ireland is what the piece is named after. And that's basically what we have to go on here, right? So I'm going to switch to, I realize I don't have, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to, there we go, switch to continuous view for this so that we can kind of see things together. And we're going to hear the music. So, a date. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. It should always be the case that when you're here, by the way, live, there's no way to be watching it this way. The only way to watch this in a replay will be on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube rather than here, you'll know. But yes, today is March 20-something. It's the first day of spring was a few days ago, so it's whatever that date is. And you would think that this watch, this nice fancy watch, would tell me it's Thursday the 24th is what it is. All right, so we're going to hear this piece of Damien's that I listened to briefly when he first posted it, and now I'll hear it again and talk about it a little bit. So let's hear some music. Actually, I'll turn the volume back up and turn repeats off just in case there's any, just because, you know, for talking about purposes, we don't need the repeats. All right, beautiful job, Damien. This is yeah, it's a lovely arrangement, and I'm assuming it's actually your original composition. Let me flip back over to where that was. Um, mhm. Words and music, Damien Dyer. Yep. So it is your original composition as well as the arrangement. So it's yeah, it's really nice, and there's a lot of different sections to it, and a lot of things that one could dig into here. My goal today is actually going to be it's often my goal to say, hey, let's look at a lot of music and say just a few things about each, and then I get sidetracked and it doesn't happen, and that's okay. But what I want to focus on here is a couple comments that I've made before that this piece will maybe illustrate pretty well. So in the newsletter this week, hopefully most of you are on my newsletter mailing list. If not, be sure to sign up for it. Um, Click on when you get back to the main community page, switch over to the school page, and you'll see where you can sign up for the newsletter if you're not already on it. But anyhow, in the newsletter this week, I talked about minor keys some and what it is that makes them both fascinating and troublesome. And what I will observe about this piece is if we really pay attention to what's going on here in the first 8 bars, it's essentially the 1 chord and the 5 chord, right? And I'm not saying there's nothing else that can happen in minor keys, but there's a little less that we know how to do that's of interest in minor keys. And so when I say we, I mean collectively, musicians over history. We found more things to do in major keys than minor keys. And so minor key pieces tend to reinforce the tonic a lot with 1 and 5, and then visit the relative major to do other stuff. And that's pretty much what's going on in this piece. So the beginning, we'll hear 1 chords and 5 chords. 1, 5. Oh, just still 1, sorry. 5, 1. Still 1, 5, 1. So right, it's all basically about 1 and 5. And I say this, and when you look at the bass part here, well, there's a lot of notes there that aren't just the root and the fifth, right? So there's a lot more going on than just roots and fifths in the actual melody, in the actual bass part, but still, I'm paying attention to the vertical structures. I'm kind of scanning up and down to tell that even though there's like little brief moments of, that's a 5 chord for a moment. It's like 1, 5, 1, 1, right? So if I break it down a little more, 1, 5, 1, 1, 5, 1, 5, right? So there's little hints. There's like one beat of the 5 chord there in the middle of that measure. And that's pretty typical. So sometimes when we talk about this, we talk about these being expansions of the tonic area. So you could really say that this whole first 4 bars is it's a whole lot of 1, and then a 5. And then, yes, within that 1 area, there's a little expansion of that, 1 to 5 and back to 1. So that is definitely a very a typical thing that happens. When staying on 1 for a while, we look for places where there's a passing tone in the melody that might imply a 5 chord, so we can just sneak it in for like a measure, for 1 beat. But as far as, I'm sorry, I'm trying to reposition my phone so I can see the chat when I need to, but also not have the fact that my phone I can't turn the sound off. Anyhow, trying to get it to not be distracting to me. So yes, there's a lot of 1 and 5 back and forth here. There's one place where there's something that I would call attention to that I need to hear again and understand. So I'm going to start in this measure a couple before B1. Okay, so what's happening here is in the second half of that measure, we ease in to the 1 chord. So we have a 5 chord here, or a hint of a 5 chord anyhow. The bass is on a D sharp, tenor's on an F sharp, and alto and soprano are both on D sharp. So, but then later we get a B in the bass part, right? So it's a 5 chord. We're expecting a 5. We get something that's basically 5-ish. It's a 5. However, we also have the tenor coming up to an E on beat 4. And we have the alto coming to an E on the and of 4, while meanwhile the soprano is still on the D sharp. That second half of that measure then feels ambiguous, and most the piece is so well done in so many respects that I have to imagine this was a conscious choice. But pay attention to this and realize that instead of just ba-da-dum, it's ba, you're going to hear a little hint of 1 before we actually hear the 1. Right? On beat 3 there. I'll stop it this time. Right at that point where I stopped, we have a tenor on a B, a bass on a B, we have a tenor on this E, and we have the alto also about to do that E. So it's like 2 of the voices arrive on the 1 chord a little early. It's a thing, and you can definitely do that, but it's definitely a conscious choice to make. So if you make that choice, believe in that choice and go for it. What I will say other than that, though, is as far as the sound of the 5 chord goes here, we don't actually hear the root other than that 1 quarter note in the bass there. So instead of calling it a 5 chord, you could say, oh no, it's really a diminished chord. It's D sharp diminished, and the A is just missing from it, and that's a possible way of looking at it also. But what I'm going to kind of call attention to is the fact that this D sharp is tripled. So usually we talk about not doubling the leading tone. And this is a leading tone, and it is not just doubled, but tripled. So again, it feels like so many things are done so well in here that there was probably a conscious decision behind that. And so I won't question if it was a conscious decision to come together and split from 4-part harmony to basically just 2-part harmony in there. But I would still think about, instead of 3 D sharps and an F sharp, 2 of each. And yes, the alto part does go up to the F sharp, on the second beat there. But at the beginning there, it's an awful lot of D sharp, and it kind of feels like the 4-part harmony sort of devolved into only 2-part. Now, there's a number of places where, again, there's stuff going on that makes me assume that that's not an accident, because there's all sorts of places here where the triads feel a little bare by design, I would have to say. Right there, what do we have? We have an E, another E, a B, and another B. We don't have the entire 1 chord, right? It's really only 2-part harmony there. There's 4 distinct parts. Don't get me wrong. There's definitely da-da-da-da-dum and da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, do-da-da-boo-ba-bum. Oh, man, I can't sing that one. 4 very distinct parts, melodically speaking. But when you actually look at the voicings, they are often just 2-part voicings. And so it's an interesting sound being achieved there, that I just have to assume is a deliberate choice to say, let's not have complete triads. And to me, that's part of the sound that we hear. The fact that we hear those open fifths like we hear there, and we hear that open fifth sound elsewhere, that's part of what gives this sound, this piece, its particular character. So again, it feels like it was probably a deliberate decision, and I point these things out so that you could realize, oh, well, that's an interesting sound. How do I make that sound? Well, you make that sound by deliberately having an open fifth like that, not giving one of the things a G. Like what they're expecting us to do is maybe have this E be a G instead. Let me actually just do that. Now I have the tenor on that note. And for that matter, right now the B is doubled. The alto and the soprano both have a B. And that's fine. You can double the fifth of a chord, but that also leads a little more to that sense of it being fifth heavy, if that makes sense. There's two fifths in the chord, so I really hear that open fifth. If instead and even though it's not open anymore, even though there's a G in there, I still hear an awful lot of B compared to how much G I hear. If this E had been an E instead, now I have the more expected thing of two roots, a third and a fifth. Doubling the root is the more common thing to do. And this is going to give it the more, more common triad kind of sound. So that's how it sounds that way. And again, if I undo all those changes, we're going to hear the open fifth and get that sound. So the thing I like to do, and most of you have seen some version of this a little speech before, but I'm going to give it to you again anyhow. Some of you haven't. And it's about the law of gravity, right? And I love to demonstrate it live. I have a bag of trail mix here in my pocket. The law of gravity tells me if I drop this trail mix, it's going to fall. It doesn't tell me whether I should drop the trail mix or not. The law of gravity does not care what I do. It tells me what's going to happen if I do it. It tells me if I drop the trail mix, it's going to fall. Am I going to drop the trail mix? I don't know. Maybe I think this time I'm going to drop it and I'm going to let it fall in my lap. There we go. This time I'm going to drop the trail mix and I'm going to catch it. Did I catch it on camera? There we go. I think I caught it on camera that time. So this time I'm not going to drop it at all. I'll just put it back in my pocket so I can enjoy it for lunch. So music theory is like the law of gravity. It does not care what you do. There are no rules in music theory that say don't do this, even if someone words it. And I'm sure I've carelessly said that before. Don't do this. It's not a don't do it. It's don't do it if you want the following result. Don't drop the trail mix if you don't want it to fall. That's the thing. There's this implied what your desired outcome is. So all these rules that we ever talk about are all based on that idea that, there's an assumed end result that we want. And usually if you're studying music theory, the assumed result is you want to sound like common practice period classical music. You want to sound like Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, back to Bach, forward to maybe, Schubert or Chopin. That's but that sweet spot around Mozart is, Mozart going forward and backwards is 100 years or so is kind of the sweet spot of what most of music theory is like, how to sound like that. Or if you're doing jazz theory, it's, how to sound like Charlie Parker or Bill Evans and moving a little forward or a little backwards from there. So that sound of two roots and two fifths is not part of that common practice period sound, but it is a fine sound. It's a sound that harkens back to the Renaissance and then comes back in rock music with the idea of a power chord. So it's just important to have that kind of awareness of what your actual goal is. So I want to just skip to the one other thing that because a lot of the piece, when it's in the minor key, it's in the minor key. Now there's places where it feels like it wants to go visit the major key a little bit. Maybe here. No, still minor. Where was it? It was somewhere else where I feel like it visited a major key a little bit. Let's and I'm looking at this spot here. That part starting right here. For at least those 4 measures, the B, the G, the B, the B. And again, there's some doubling here. This is really talking a little more about the key of G or even the key of C with that F. We're not hearing that strong E minor sound. We're not hearing any E minor triads, and we're not hearing that B chord, that 5 chord that tells us we're in B. And then, you know, this little passage right here, that's a G triad, right? It really feels like we're visiting G major a little bit, but only for a moment, because then we get to hear that B7 chord again. This E flat should have been spelled D sharp, like all the other ones were, D sharp, and then a B in the tenor. Wow, that's a high. It's written to be this down an octave. Yeah, that's a high tenor part there. But in any case, alto part is here. Yeah, that tenor part is screaming. There's not a ton of tenors that can hit that high B up there, but it's going to be very powerful if they do. They're going to be belting, and it's higher than the alto, higher than the alto, higher than the soprano, higher than the alto. So hopefully that's the melody there. And then I feel like the soprano is actually the melody, and it's below that tenor, and that could be a little problematic unless that was a deliberate choice there. But anyhow, the part I really want to skip to is where it goes to G minor suddenly, because I want to make an observation about key changes, and then I'm going to flip to talking about another piece. So I'm looking for the B flat. There we go. So here's where it goes to G minor, and I want to talk about this modulation for a second. That modulation to G minor, and it's not even a modulation, it's just a teleportation, right? Modulation would imply some path you took to get to G minor. It's a modulation, sure, but it's not even about how we got to G minor. It's just, here we are, we're in G minor, right? There's nothing to set it up, it's just a sudden G minor. And the comment that I would make about modulations, and I've made this, I only know so many things, and I just tell you the same things over and over again. I know a lot of things, but there are some things that I will tell you over and over, and here's one of them. It's that some people have heard this notion, or maybe you perceive a notion, that different keys have different feel. The key of E minor feels different than the key of G minor, feels different than the key of F minor, or that C major feels different from A flat major, etc. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong if you feel that, but I will tell you it's subjective, and it's probably based on some very specific things that don't necessarily apply the way you might think. Like, for instance, if you're primarily a guitar player, then the key of C does feel very different from A flat, not just to play but to hear, because the key of C involves all the open strings on the guitar. The key of A flat does not. You basically only get an open G string. And so most of the chord voicings in the key of A flat are bar chords. Well, bar chords have a totally different sound than chords with open strings. So in jazz, we actually typically don't use not that I play jazz guitar, but we typically use bar chords even in keys that like the key of C. You'll still see jazz guitarists not use open strings. I know a lot of jazz guitarists just go out of their way to never play open strings because they can be a little distracting if there's an uncontrolled mix of open strings versus when your fingers are on frets. So the key of C on guitar has a particular sound in large part because of the tuning of the instrument. And similarly, the key of A flat sounds different on a saxophone than on a violin because of the tunings of the instruments. Again, violins are tuned more like guitars. Those open strings really are home in the key of C. Playing an A flat on the violin means all fingers stopped, and it does. And on violin, you don't get frets to help you. So not only is that the string is stopped, but it's a little subjective about the intonation. Like if you want to play an A flat on a violin, you got to put your finger down on that G string at the first fret position, whatever you call it, fingerboard position, and everyone's got maybe a millimeter different opinion of where that might go, and so much more so the further up the fingerboard you get. And so the key of A flat on stringed instruments has a very different sound than the key of C because of those issues. On a saxophone, the key of A flat is very, very simple because the design of a saxophone, an alto saxophone, is such that the key of E flat is their home key. The key of E flat on an alto saxophone is the key in which everything sounds perfectly in tune, no side keys needed. You just move your fingers up and down like this to play an E flat scale. Because of the transposition of the instrument. So A flat is very close to that. It's only got like one note difference. So a lot of the differences that we hear between keys really have to do with the designs of specific instruments. What is not dependent on the specific instruments are modulations, what direction they go on the circle of fifths, and how far they go. So we are going from E minor, which has one sharp in its key signature, to G minor, which has two flats in its key signature. So if you think about a circle of fifths, we have one sharp, and then we go, depending on which way you draw it, and which way my camera is facing, this either looks forwards or backwards to you, but bear with me. If you have one sharp, then we can go to no sharps, and then we can go to one flat, and then we can go to two flats. So what this is, it's going flatter, it's going in the flatter direction, and it's going 3 ticks of the circle. If we think of it like a clock, like a circle of fifths as a clock, it's going 3 ticks flatter. So it's just like going from C major to E flat major, or if you want to think the actual relative majors, it's like going from G major to B flat major. So we're going 3 ticks flatter. Well, that's a pretty fair distance. It's certainly something that Mozart didn't do. Mozart didn't do modulations of 3 ticks, at least not very often, except when he wanted real drama. Beethoven loved that kind of drama, and he used that kind of modulation more, and by the time you get to Schumann and Romantic era composers, yeah, those sorts of extreme modulations become really common. So anytime you go from G minor, then it's dark, right? And G minor isn't inherently darker than E minor. It's the transition from E minor to G minor. Because if that G minor came from 3 more steps flatter, so let's do that. I'm going to go from B flat minor to G minor. Now it's not as dark. I mean, it's still dark. It's still G minor. But the difference, which direction you're going, whether the modulation is flatter or sharper, it just has a different feel depending on whether you're going flatter on the circle, sharper on the circle, whether you're going to a related key that's only one tick difference on the circle of fifths, or whether you're going to an unrelated key that's 3 or 4 ticks away. So be aware of that as if you do write modulations. And that's why a piece we looked at last time, which I don't think I have here, I do have here, that one piece of Graham's when he went from E flat to E. Let me just play that for a second. So here we're going from E flat to E. It's only a half step difference on the piano. But on the circle of fifths, it's 5 steps different, right? It's going from E flat, which has 3 flats, to E, which has 4 sharps. So it's actually 7 steps in one direction, or 7 ticks on the circle of fifths in one direction, 5 ticks in the other direction. It's basically as far as you can go, almost. I mean, 6 ticks is as far as you can go before you start coming around the other side. So that half-step modulation is really powerful because it has that dual quality of only being a half-step different, but being 5 ticks on the circle of fifth different. So when I think Dave commented in about this, that wow, that was like an extreme difference. That's what he's talking about. It's not that going up a half step is a big modulation in the voice. It's only a half step. But in the ears, it's a huge difference because it's 5 ticks on the circle of fifths. And the reason the circle of fifths matters is it controls how many notes the scales have in common. If we play an E flat scale, and then play an E scale, there's only a few notes in common there. This note is in common. It was the root of one, it was the tonic of one, and the leading tone of the other. This note was in common. It was scale degree 4 in E flat, scale degree 3 in E major. And that's it. Those are the only 2 notes those 2 scales have in common. When you go to a related key, they might have 6 notes in common. But this only had 2 notes in common. So that is a big difference. And not only that, but also is, this note here is A flat in the key of E flat. It's G sharp in the key of E. On the piano, it's the same button. I can't make them sound different. But if you're singing, you can make those 2 notes sound different, and people do. You sing according to the key you're in and tune it according to the key, and the intervals that you hear in your head are not necessarily the equally tuned intervals on a piano. You might be hearing more harmonically pure intervals, and there's a whole theory of like the acoustics of this and what the interval ratios are supposed to be that I don't really want to get into more, but I will just say that yes, if you are a string player or a singer who, especially barbershop singing, I know they really focus on this sort of thing. You really focus on the tuning of these intervals to get you the right sound in your ear as far as the overtones go, and the pitch might be not exactly where it is on the piano. It's a little bit different, so that this note in this chord might sound different than this note in that chord, how you actually tune the thing. So that also, so even though there's only 2 notes in common, it's actually less than that in common because they're tuned a little differently, potentially. So that was a comment I wanted to make about that. While we're talking about minor keys, or at least returning to the subject of minor keys, Heist, if you're around and feel like popping in, I should make sure I'm not seeing any other weird things here, but I do see lots of people around. So, Heist, if you're here and want to say anything about this minor key piece of yours, feel free to say hi, and I would invite you. In fact, let me just put in the invitation, and if you're here, I don't see you here, so speak up in the chat if you show up. I talked about one of Heist's pieces during office hours, a really nice piece, much more involved than this one. But this is a nice, simple folk song kind of piece that Heist has arranged, and so we'll hear this one now. Let me think about this for a second. Oh, no, this is correct. I was thinking we were hearing chord symbols, but nope, we're just hearing the piano voicings. There you go. Much shorter, simpler piece than the other one, and yet it's the same story of being in a minor key. And Heist has put in a lot of Roman numeral analysis things here that sort of imply different chords. And yes, I hear these chords, and yet at some level, they are tonic expansion, to use the term I used before. What's really happening is it's 1 and a little bit of 5, or maybe to 1. So yeah, 1 and then 5 to 1. That's the basic underpinning of the piece. And he's put in some additional chords in here so that we can hear more stuff happening. And yet, when that happens, there's a distinction I would make between, tonic expansion, which is just chords that are sort of decorating the one, versus like actually creating some specific motion. So let me hear this again and focus on what's actually happening within that first phrase. So, one of the things that he has done here is he's actually taken a page from the Jazz Piano Holiday playbook here, and on his 1 chord, he's actually added a 9th, the E. So on his 1 chord, he's in D minor. He's added an E, and he's added a C sharp, right? Jazz, right? I'm actually going to remove those there. Not so much, I mean, it does feel, out of place for a folk song, but I don't care about that. I care about the fact that it obscured the harmony a little bit. And I want to understand the harmony a little bit more without the color tones. So this, now that's really more clearly just all a 1 chord. Right? All just the D minor chord. When we come to this chord that he has here, he's written something that is a little different maybe than what I'm perceiving, and so I'll want to get his opinion on this later. I really hear that A in the melody and the C sharp in the piano voicing here as suggesting the 5 chord. In the key of D minor, I really hear that as that. Now he's calling it 3 because he's got an F underneath it, and he's calling this an F augmented triad is what's happening. F, A, and C sharp. He is not wrong to say that. And yet, I'm not sure that's what I hear. When augmented triads happen, they are often disguises for something else. In other words, this triad here, and he's even got an E in it, and he's got an A in the bass. Everything about this, if I just left out the F, I no longer have an F augmented triad. I have an A chord. Right? That's just an A chord. So the F is kind of sneaking in there, providing some color. But is it really the root of the chord? Are we really hearing a 3 chord? Or are we hearing a 5 chord? I'm going to suggest we're hearing a 5 chord. And that F was just color. That F is now a flat 13th, which is a jazz thing again. So I'm all in favor of the F. In fact, I'd lose the E and put the F here. And I might put a G there. Now we got jazz, jazz, jazz. That's a song, by the way. So that is, I only really changed 1 note. I changed the E to the F there, and then I took that F and changed it to a G there. So I kept an F, but I changed what octave it was in, and then I lost the E because I felt like it was clashing with the F a little bit, and put a 7th on that A chord. So I really hear a 5 chord. I really hear this as 1, 5, 1. Now, it doesn't actually go back to 1, and this was really nice. By going 5, so this is now a 5 chord in my version of things. So I'll call that 5, 7. 5 to 6. Right? That's the classic deceptive resolution. And deceptive resolutions are a thing in major keys, but they're also a thing in minor keys, and they're kind of flip sides of a coin. In a major key, we expect 5 to go to 1, and 1 is major. If instead we go to 6, we went minor. In a minor key, it's the other way around. 5 to 1, we would have expected to go to minor. to a 1 minor chord. But instead, the 6th chord in a minor key is major. So in a major key, going to 6 is minor instead of major. In a minor key, going to 6 is major instead of minor. That's kind of backwards. So deceptive cadences in a major key make it a little darker because you're going minor instead of major. Deceptive cadences in a minor key make it a little brighter because you're going to a major chord instead of a minor chord. So it's actually making it a little brighter. And yeah, that's a really nice thing to do. By the way, also relating to the very first piece that we heard, and I talked about how there was that one place where we had the 5 chord that then kind of snuck its way into 1 partially, and then the rest of the chord joined it on the 1. There's sort of a similar thing going on here. I have a 5 chord, or as Heist was calling it, a 3 augmented chord, but a D in the melody here. Now you can do that. That D does not fit the chord. It didn't fit the F augmented chord, nor does it fit the A7 chord. When I say it doesn't fit, what I mean is it's a half step above a chord tone, and that's usually a sign of not fitting. So an F augmented chord, D, is a half step above that C sharp. So it's not in the chord and is kind of a very dissonant non-chord tone. And the same is true if I call it A7. D is a half step above that C sharp, a half step above the chord tone. So it's I guess always you can have notes in a melody that are dissonant against the chord, but then you want to think about what that note is doing there and how long you're spending on it. And at the tempo it's going, you're barely aware of it. In fact, let me redo my changes. No, that is my changes. Okay. I'm going to play it for a second the way I have it. That D goes by so quickly that I barely hear it. But if I slow it down from 108 to, say, 60, I'm going to hear that D more prominently. I hear it more prominently. It's still maybe fast enough that it doesn't bother me. But at the tempo it was going, it was not a problem at all. So that's something to be aware of, that, yeah, you can harmonize a beat or a measure in a way that leaves one note kind of hanging if it doesn't last too long, if it's not too prominent. And that's like a subjective thing you get to deal with, you get to think about. So on this particular case, especially at the actual tempo, that back and change my Roman numerals so that I'm looking at what I'm looking at. So at that original tempo then, yeah, I definitely do not hear that D as dissonant at all. It's the technical term for this, by the way, is called an anticipation. When one voice arrives a little early on to the next chord, like we're arriving on this B flat chord, and that D is about to be a good note. It's just one voice is arriving at it early. The actual melody is arriving a little early. That's normal. Anticipation, that's why there's a name for it. It's a thing. In this piece, it's just the voice doing it. But in the other piece that we were hearing, it was not just the one voice doing it. It was, first of all, it was a slower tempo, and it was the tenor hitting that tonic a whole beat, while also the alto then also got there a half a beat early, and it was a slower tempo. So I was much more aware of the anticipation of what was happening there because it came in 2 voices and lasted longer. So it like, it's almost like it slid from here to there because some notes got, for a little while, we're hearing both of those notes together and then the D sharp leaves. And I kind of feel like, again, it was a deliberate choice there, so I'm not going to argue the choice. I'll just point out that Heist's version is more typical in that it's just the one voice doing it and it's doing it faster. So, so the point is it's 1 and 5, and yes, he has that little deceptive resolution in there, and then it comes right back to 1. So it's got a little motion to 6 and then back to 1. But it's basically diatonic motion. And the point that I would make about this is diatonic other than the leading tone. And we got to allow that the leading tone is a legit tone. If you're in D minor, C sharp is diatonic as far as this goes. We can't say, oh, you had a non-diatonic chord just because you played a 5 chord. No, that's still diatonic. So this piece, as are most minor key pieces, the motions within the key are typically mostly diatonic because that's what there is to do. And when I'm done talking about this, I'm going to flip to Dave's piece from last week, and just, if you don't mind, Dave, let me know if you don't want me to do this. But what I want to do is take your piece and add some non-diatonic chords to show the kinds of things you can do in major keys that are a little harder to do in minor keys. So this last chord here, now this one is an honest-to-goodness F chord. And he, again, has a 7th on it that's obscuring things a little bit. So I'm going to delete that 7th. It's an F major triad. He had an E in it, and I'm just going to delete that to make it a little easier to hear what's happening. So he has, and then, and here again, he has that same exact sonority of an F augmented triad with an E added that he wants to call an F augmented triad or an F augmented major 7th chord. But my ear is still, the way it's used here, just setting up a 1 chord, I don't hear it as F augmented. I hear it as A being the root. Even though it's not in the bass here, I did hear an A in the bass earlier in the measure. So I hear the A as the root here. So to me, I can call that a 3 chord, fine, but this guy is still a 5 chord if you ask me. This is a 5 chord, and the F is actually the odd man out. It's in the melody, yes, but it's in there as a passing tone. So I'm going to lose it in the piano part and change it to just the 7th. So I feel like that is what we're actually hearing. 3 and an F chord, and then, in fact, I don't even hear that, to be honest. What I really hear is, you tell what I did there? I played a 1 chord in second inversion. I played a D minor chord with an A in the bass, rather than an F triad with an A in the bass. It's different by only 1 note, but the rest of the chord is the same, and if I put them both in there, now I could say I'm playing the 1 chord as a 7th chord. So even though it's absolutely true that that was an F major triad, what we're really hearing at some level is the D minor chord. That's what we're hearing. And in fact, I'm even going to lose the E in the bass here because it's about to be doubled in the melody and it's dissonant against that F, and I think I'm just going to give it 2 beats here. So I'm going to play those measures. So really, even though he made them kind of look like other triads, it was really just 1 note different from 1 and 5, basically. So yes, when I talk about minor keys being a little more problematic, this is what I mean, is that there's really relatively little to do. You can try to force the issue by saying, hey, I'm going to play 3 instead of 1, or 3 augmented instead of 5, but you're really playing games with just the spelling of the chords, because what we're really hearing are still 1s and 5s. The 6, using the 6 here, using that deceptive resolution, that's like the one thing you get to do that's fun in minor keys that you don't get to do in major keys. So that's like the extra fun thing that minor keys can give you there. By the way, for anyone who's taken my harmony course, you'll know that when I talk about minor keys, I label my Roman numerals relative to major keys. So instead of calling, if I'm in the key of D minor, sorry, there is a B flat as the 6th scale degree, but we know there's also know there's, right, harmonic minor, melodic minor, and we know there's Dorian. So both B flat and B natural both have homes in the key of D minor. So I personally prefer, because of that possible ambiguity, if you say 6, what do you mean B or do you mean B flat? I choose to get rid of that ambiguity by calling B flat flat 6. So I'll call B 6, whether we're in D major or D minor. And then if I want a B flat chord, I'll call it flat 6, again, whether I'm in D major or D minor. My impression is that roughly 40% of the world does it the way I do. I'm not an outlier for doing that, but I recognize I'm not the majority either. So unfortunately, when you see people doing Roman numeral like this, you have to sort of do a little detective work. If you see a 6 like that, you have to look at it and say, now wait a minute, is that really scale degree major? Is it scale degree the major 6th above the root, or is it the minor 6th above the root? Is it the natural minor scale or melodic minor scales 6 they're talking about? You just have to look at the music to figure that out, unfortunately. Okay, so so Dave hasn't jumped up and told me he doesn't want me to do this yet, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to jump over to his piece, and I just want to do a quick version of, oh yeah, Dean's piece too. Next week, Dean. But I'm going to give it a quick listen before we go. I want to take Dave's piece and just talk about putting in some additional chords. So here's where he's got the melody sung, and I can read the clefs. So let's go with this. So just that much is all I want to talk about. And what we have here is pretty straightforward harmonization, right? 1, then I'll play it in the same octave. 1 to 4, 5 to 1, right? 1, 4, 5, 1. That's a standard chord progression as you can get. And what I want to do is talk about how we can do some of the things that I talked about in my workshop here. So for instance, if we're going to go visit the 4 chord, I talked about tonicization there, and we can totally do that. We can give it a secondary dominant. Right? So I played a B flat triad, then I changed to B flat 7, which is the 5 chord in the key of E flat. So that's one example of doing that. I put in a secondary dominant. And in the jazz piano course, then I also talked about, well, if you're going to put in a 5, let's put in a 2-5, right? So I can totally do that. 1, and then in the key of E flat, this is 2, 5, 1 in the key of E flat. So that's that little bit of tonicization. That kind of stuff that I just did just flows so nicely and works so easily in major keys. Those sorts of little tonicizations end up not being as interesting in minor keys or not working at all, but they do work some. And so hopefully at some point we'll get to see examples of that happening. But then what I'll do is I'll take this 5 to 1 and change that into a 2-5-1, because we can do that, right? And then, well, I could also make that too into a secondary dominant. So I still want to get to the F, but I want to have fun on the way there, right? So I'll give it a secondary dominant, 2, 5. So dominant 2 to 5. And this F, this C7 that I'm playing is the 5 chord in the key of F. So if I play it from the beginning that way, Now I also in the both in all the things that I do, the harmony course, the chord progression workshop, jazz piano course, I'm always talking about borrowed chords, minor four chords in particular. And when I see an opportunity to use one, I want to try it. So I could also go five, instead of having a five chord here, I could have it be minor four chord to one. You know, that melody happens a whole bunch of times in this piece. Maybe I use that one once. Minor four. Maybe I'll even let it go to five. So it fits better. So I could totally do that. Another thing I could do, as long as I have that C7. In fact, I didn't really love the C7. I liked it better as C minor 7. But now what I have, let me actually put in the chords that I just put in there. I put in B flat for 2 beats, and then F minor 7 for a beat, B flat 7, B flat 7. And now, oh, the melody is not that top line. I'm getting myself a little confused here. It's actually the third line that's the melody. That's the melody. So let me just play my chords with that melody. Now, I have to ask myself, am I okay with the E flat in the melody against the B flat? Because I said that fourth, it clashes with the third. But if I call it a suspension and then resolve it, then I'm happy. Yeah, now I definitely want the C minor, and I know I want the C minor because the melody note F would have clashed against the C7 chord, and this time I couldn't, it doesn't resolve down to the E, and doing that, calling it a suspension wouldn't have worked for me. So now I've got those chords, and I got a hole in this measure, and I really want to tonicize that C minor 7 with a G7. And I see that the melody here is going to have a B flat, and it's going to clash a little bit with the B natural and a G7, so I'll wait until this beat to put in my G7. So. Now, yes, I'm making it sound like jazz. And that's partially because of how I'm voicing it and how much of this I'm doing. But I want to show you that this is the path that these songs can be on. All of these songs can be on this path if you choose to put them there, and then you choose how much of that you want. But part of the whole point of these exercises is to explore this sort of stuff, to go maybe a little further than you want, to decide how far you want to go. Because if you don't go past where you want, how do you know where the line is? You got to cross the line to know when it's time to come back. So you want to cross the line at least sometimes and then say, okay, that was too much, and then dial it back to just the right amount. So yeah, Dean, your piece here that you posted here, we've looked at other pieces of yours at other times, and I don't feel like I'm giving you short shrift or anything, but I definitely want to come back and talk about this more at some other point, because yeah, it is a nice arrangement of a familiar song, and you did some nice things with it, and it totally bears hearing. So I'm just going to play it, and then we'll talk about it next time. Yeah, nice job. And yeah, some really beautiful harmonies in there. And I do think that MuseScore's playing of the chord symbols isn't necessarily doing you favors voice leading wise. And so I'm going to, kind of play through this one a little bit next time and talk about things and whether, whether the voicings will make some of these chords sound a little better than they do in that. But yeah, no, really beautiful piece. And you've done a great job with it. And I look forward to digging into that hopefully next week. So. Well, the hour goes by, and I get to talk about music the whole time, so I just have a ball. And hope you enjoy these sessions as much as I do. And just keep posting music. I just look forward to having more music to look at. There's one more week, because next week is still part of March. Yes, it is the 31st. So I am thinking that starting in April, I'm going to, try to find some new stuff going on. And in particular, when I mentioned the idea of trying to have an organization to things where we choose two people's pieces maybe ahead of time to focus on, I want to come up with a process for that. And by all means, feel free to be posting suggestions in the community area so we can maybe come up with a strategy for this, because I want to serve you, right? I want to do what works for you. So I want to hear what you think would be the best way of going about it, and then we figure out how to make it happen together. So anyhow, have a great week, and I will see you next time.